All stand, please. Please be seated.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Reid.
Yeah, now, Mr. Hall, we were getting you a black pen and we were looking at some other matters during the break. Could you mark with the black pen on that map where it was that you saw smoke to the northwest of Inala Road when you were at Inala Road?
So an X marks the spot?
That's if that suits you, yes. If that could be retrieved from the witness, please, shown to his honour.
Yes, thank you.
If council could look at it as well, please. Thank you. If I could have a look as well. Thank you. Now, we might just conduct an experiment if we could, Your Honour, and if that could be given to Mr Tempone to see how he's going with the technology to reproduce what is seen on... First of all, I tend to that.
Well, don't make too much haste, because it may not need to be too
No, that's true. It's already blocked on, Mr.
You happy with that, Mr. Hall?
Yes, Your Honour, I think that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Well, then we can mark that for identification, Mr. Reid, and once we sort out our screenshot technology, which I think can just be done with keystrokes, it doesn't have to use the cursor, then that can be added as a document.
Can I just let Your Honour know that Mr Tempone did find a fix over the break. He can take a screenshot of an image that's displayed on the court screen, and then, as Your Honour's just seen, he can draw on the screenshot. And I'd suggested to my learned friend that when Mr Tempone's asked to do that, he can also write on the image the initials and a number to indicate which witness the image is associated with, and that way we've got effectively a soft copy of a drawn map.
Yes, thanks. Mr. Reid?
Yes, thank you. You don't have that exhibit? No, he doesn't need it. Thank you. Now, before your pager went off, you were working at Cambridge?
That's correct.
More towards Mount Rumney?
The property was on Alliance Drive, so it was at the top of the hill, sort of on the eastern side of Mount Rumney, I think, looking across towards the airport direction.
Right. And when your pager went off, you looked in the direction of the airport and you saw a smoke column.
Correct.
At that stage?
Yes.
And what did it look like?
Well, it looked like smoke coming from the area of White Hills Road. I was reasonably happy at that stage that the details on the page were correct, because I know that area well, and I could see into that area from where I was working. There was a smoke column starting to generate, but it was laying over to the right, which indicated to me that it was being pushed by the wind. It was also very windy where I was working at Cambridge, so I was mindful of the wind. Sort of light grey in colour, and appeared to be from the smoke travelling towards the east-southeast.
And it appeared to you to be a fairly well advanced smoke column?
I think so, yes.
When you said a moment ago, I think you said bent to the right, but don't let me put words in your mouth.
Laying over to the right.
Laying over to the right, that's the right as you looked at it.
Yes, correct. So the right as I looked at it towards the east-southeast direction.
Thank you. Now, I'll leave that subject. You were only at Inala Road for about 10 minutes.
Yes, not long, Your Honour.
Yep. And then you went off to Gangels Road, correct?
That's correct.
Could the, Mr Tempone, could you please bring up document 75, Bates 115? Now, Mr Hall, 3/4 of the way down that page, you'll see your name at 1449. That's the call that you've given evidence about at Dunalley Road, correct?
Correct.
And then leave Runnymede 31 out of it, come down to the next entry at 1458-47. You're now at Gangels Road.
Correct.
Now, can you please, insofar as the entry needs any explanation, could you give that to the court?
I can. So at that time, at 1458, I radioed through and said that I was on scene with Sorrel Group 1. So Sorrel Group 1 is the call sign for the group officer of the Sorrel Group, who was Gavin Rainbird at the time. He was driving the vehicle I was in. We're on a track on Gangels Road, Graham Winstanley's property. Fire front is currently at grid reference 567602. Winds blowing 50 k's in southwest direction. Fire burning quite well in thick terrain.
Right. Now, what did you see? You say fire front is currently at. What did you see and how far away from you was it that you saw what you saw?
The fire was literally only probably 20 to 30 metres in front of us. We were travelling down a bush track and the fire was across that track, so we couldn't proceed any further from there. But it wasn't a gravel road, it was just a bush track.
And in what direction were you facing when you got to the 20 to 30 metres from the fire?
North.
Now, there is a grid reference there of 567602. Have you had the opportunity to mark that grid reference accurately on any map?
No, I haven't.
Are you able to go back to that grid reference and then come back to the court with that grid reference marked?
I can, yes.
So I'd seek, I don't have any more questions of the witness, at least at this stage. Your Honour, if he could attend to that task and come back at a time that's convenient.
Yes. Mr Armstrong?
No objection, Your Honour.
All right, well, we'll do that. Thanks, Mr Hall. Do you have any re-examination?
Not for me.
Yes, all right. Well, thanks very much for your attendance. If you could do that and just let someone know that you're in a position to do it, and we'll organise for it to be arranged.
Okay.
We'll organise it for it to be attended. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Your Honour, just on that, we might be able to provide Mr Hall with an aerial map similar to the one that we've been using today, but with the grid references marked on a larger scale, as it were, so that he can produce a marked copy of a
Well,
map
that
or
would be
aerial
good. Your
photograph.
instructors know how to contact Mr Hall.
We do, thank you.
We'll get you see if we can get you an aerial map that might do the trick.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Now, Your Honour, the next witness is Mr Stephen Walkley. Your Honour will recall that he's been mentioned a few times as one of the TFS fire investigators. Mr Walkley has provided a written statement, and don't ask Your Honour to read the statement, but I should just record for the record that Mr Walkley recorded in the written statement that he agrees to be bound by the Supreme Court Expert Witness Code of Conduct.
Thank you.
Now, putting the written statement to one side, Your Honour, my learned friend and I have agreed that I will lead Mr Walkley through his evidence in chief.
Yes, thank you. So the report's not tendered and I won't read it.
Correct, thank you, Your
Yes.
Honour.
Thanks, Mr Walkley. If you just remain standing for a sec while you take the oath or affirmation.
Would you like to take an oath?
Affirmation, please.
Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say I affirm.
I affirm.
Thank you.
Yes, please take a seat now. Feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr Walkley, would you state your full name for the court
Stephen Walkley,
and your current address
22 Dodgers Hill Road, Dodgers Ferry.
and your current occupation, if any?
I'm retired.
Thank you. Now, prior to your retirement, Mr Walkley, you were an officer with the Tasmanian Fire Service, is that correct?
Yes, I was an officer of Tasmanian Fire Service for just over 41 years.
Thank you. And could the court book operator please bring up document WTS.001.001.0152? It's part of court book document 50. And at page 0152, please, Mr Timpani. Thank you. And if we could zoom out just a little bit, please, Mr Timpani. Now, Mr Walkley, do you recognise that as a copy of your curriculum vitae?
I do.
And perhaps just for completeness, Mr Timpani, could we scroll over the next 3 pages? And Mr Walkley, I take it that's a complete copy of your current curriculum vitae.
That was current as of earlier this year. It says my position as current is still at the fire service, and that obviously changed at the last day of last year.
Thank you. Now, just briefly, could you summarise for His Honour, please, your career and your experience at the Tasmanian Fire Service? What was your role?
I commenced the fire service as a firefighter 41 years ago, and I went through the process of being promoted to station officer. Once I became a station officer, I then became after a period of around 3 years, I became a training officer for a further 3 years. Then I was able to and commenced the role of regional fire investigator, and that position I held for approximately 8 years. After that, I worked with the volunteers in the east coast of Tasmania, managing their brigades. Whilst I was doing that, I became promoted to senior station officer. I continued that role with working with volunteers in several areas in Tasmania, in the southwest, Midlands and east coast again. I've acted as a district officer in those areas as well. I was also acting district officer for our training division, and I went back to my role as a operational firefighter about 4 years before the finish of my career, and during that period of time I managed one of the shifts out of Hobart Fire Brigade.
Thank you, Mr Walkley. Now, over what period of time were you involved in investigating fires, the origins of fires on behalf of the TFS?
I did it as a full-time position for approximately 8 years, and I did it as an acting position for about 6 months sometime after that.
Thank you. Now, over the course of your career with the TFS, and in particular in your role as a fire investigator, Mr Walkley, can you estimate firstly in relation to structural fires, how many structural fires you investigated?
As a pure estimate, it's in the high hundreds or thousands.
And what about wildfires or bushfires?
Not as many as structural fires, but nonetheless still hundreds of bushfires or fires in vegetation or similar.
Thank you. Your Honour, I should tender Mr Walkley's curriculum vitae, please. Now, Mr Walkley, in early January 2013, what was your role within the Tasmanian Fire Service?
Early January 2013, I was deployed to Cambridge as a logistics, or managing the logistics section, which was providing provisions and any needs to various crews that working in fires in various areas of southern Tasmania.
Thank you. Now, in early January 2013, you were involved in investigating the origins of what became known as the Fawcett Dunalley bushfire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you tell His Honour how you first came to be asked to play a role in that investigation?
Senior Station Officer Barry Bones, actually he might have been station officer at the time, phoned me, I believe it was on the 5th of January, and said that he was investigating the cause of the fire that eventually burnt most of Dunalley. He'd been there for a day, and he asked me, as I was more experienced than he was, in fact I was one of the two most experienced fire investigators in Tasmania, particularly in bushfires, and asked me if I would assist him and give him my expertise in investigating that fire and go with him to the property where he believed it started on the next day, which I accepted.
All right, so the next day, I take it, was the 6th of January 2013?
That's correct.
Thank you. And could you tell His Honour, please, firstly, how and where you arranged to meet with Mr. Bones for the purpose of visiting the property?
Yes, I arranged to meet with Mr. Bones at Fawcett, near the Fawcett shop, at the turn-off to go to Delmore Road. We arranged that because I don't live that far from that location, and it was only going to take me a few minutes to drive there. So I met him at the Delmore Road turn-off near the Fawcett shop at around, from memory, I think it was approximately 10 o'clock on the 6th of January.
Thank you. And was anybody else there with you and Mr. Bones when you met?
Yeah, there was Tony Davidson, he's a station officer from Launceston, from the Tasmanian Fire Service, and several police officers. I don't recall their names or their titles or their roles.
All right, thank you. Now, you referred to a Tony Davidson, Mr.
Sorry, Tony Johnson.
Thank you. Now, having met with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Bones at the intersection that you've mentioned, could you tell His Honour where you then went?
We then went to number 242 White Hill Road. White Hill Road runs off Delmore Road.
All right, and when you got to number 242, could you explain to His Honour what you then did as by way of commencing your involvement in the investigation into the source of the fire?
One of the first things I did was go and introduce myself to the lady who lived at the property, just for courtesy. I thought it wouldn't be nice for her to just have a bunch of people landing at the front doorstep and not knowing what was going on, which I did, and she already understood why we were there, and so that conversation was fairly short. I then went with Station Officer Bones, and we walked around various areas of the property. Barry was explaining things to me that he'd seen the day before, things that he'd made note of the day before, and we looked at various indicators of where the fire had been, which gave burn patterns which may have helped us to get back to where the fire started.
Right. Now, could I ask the court operator, and you'll see this displayed on the screen in front of you, Mr. Walkley, could we please bring up the court book document 138? Or perhaps, in fact, there might be a better one, which would be document 101. And within 101, could we go to photograph 0063? Now, Mr. Walkley, I can tell you that this photograph is already in evidence as a photograph of the residence at 242 White Hills Road. Do you recognise it?
I do.
All right. Now, you said a moment ago that you commenced your investigation after speaking with Ms. Barrett by accompanying Mr. Bones as you walked around parts of the property. By reference to this photo, could you tell His Honour, to the best of your recollection, where did you first go to look for the fire indicators that you just mentioned?
I believe from memory that it was at the approximate bottom of the driveway which is on the right-hand side.
So you see the cursor on the screen there, Mr. Walkley. If we could put the cursor going up the photograph to, could you
Straight up from there. Keep going. About there.
All right, thank you. And was it just you and Mr. Bones at that point?
No, I believe Station Officer Johnson was with us as well.
All right. And can you tell His Honour what you were looking for and what you observed at that location?
What we were looking for was various burn patterns, things which will give us an indication of how things burnt, and those indicators, which I can elaborate more on if you wish, those things would eventually take us back to where the fire started.
All right. Well, I will ask you to elaborate on the burn indicators, Mr. Walkley. Firstly, can I get you to list the kind of indicators, and then we'll go through each of them and you can tell me why they're significant. So firstly, what kinds of things are you looking for?
Charring to trees.
Thank you. That's number one.
Leaf freeze.
Thank you.
Burn patterns on rocks.
Number three. Yes.
Cupping to grass stems.
What was that one?
Cupping,
Uh-huh.
as in a cup of tea cupping.
The grass stems.
Yes.
Anything else?
They are the major ones. There are a few minor ones, but I don't find them as useful as the ones I've just mentioned.
All right. So firstly, in the area that's indicated by the cursor, and perhaps I might use Mr. Reed's trick, Mr. Temponi. Could you take a screenshot and again, Mr. Walkley, could you indicate for the operator where the cursor should go? No, just the thin pen, please, Mr. Temponi. That will do. That will do. So again, Mr. Walkley, I think the cursor was slightly up the photograph. Is that right?
Further up.
Further up.
So,
About there.
thank you. Now, Mr. Temponi, could you mark that with a letter A, please? Now, at location A, Mr. Walkley, could you tell His Honour what you are looking for, firstly in relation to charring on trees?
Charring on trees, it's very hard. Could I use the whiteboard to help explain?
It makes it difficult to put into evidence, but
I'll try to explain.
yeah.
Particularly with larger trees, it has, as the fire's burning from a particular direction, the charring on the side closest to where the fire is coming from is lower than on the far side of where the fire is coming from. And that's caused by the wind pushing the fire, creates a
calm on the other side.
a sort of a positive pressure on the wind side and a negative pressure on the other side. So as the flames go around the tree, they're drawn into that negative pressure and go up in a sort of a plume, which gives you a sort of a shape like this on the tree. And that shape would indicate the fire is coming from that direction and going in that direction.
Yes, all right. How do we describe that shape for the transcript? It's at an angle,
It's an angle, yes. It's pretty much a, depending on how fast the fire's burning, the angle can vary quite remarkably. But generally, it's about a 45-degree angle from one side to the other side.
Yep. Thank you.
Now, I'm sorry to make Mr. Temponi jump around, but just as an example, Mr. Walkley, could I ask Mr. Temponi to, still in document 101 in the court book, bring up photograph 0013. Now, Mr. Walkley, there's a photograph of a tree there with some kind of white wooden arrow object placed at the bottom of it. Is that the kind of tree charring phenomenon that you've just described to His Honour?
it is, although I just had a quick glance at those photos as they came up, and 0016 looked a bit better. It might show a bit better.
Could we bring up 0016, please, Mr. Timponi?
I think that shows it a bit better.
All right, thank you. But that's the phenomenon you're describing?
That's correct.
So is the fire burning towards me in that photograph?
The fire is burning towards the right, to my right, yes.
All right. Now, in terms of this first fire indicator, the charred trees, back at location A on the photograph that we marked a moment ago, what conclusions, if any, did you reach at location A as to the direction in which the fire had been travelling?
Well, I'd like to make it clear that we didn't just stand at point A and not move around. We moved around that whole area looking at different things. But to answer the question, in that whole area, the patterns on the trees were similar and all indicated that the fire was coming from the same direction.
And which direction
And the direction that was from, in the photo, the fire was travelling from the direction of where the house is, or that general area, back towards where the A is on the map.
So from east to west?
Yes.
Thank you. Now...
No, sorry.
Sorry, west to
West to east.
Sorry, yes. Thank you. Now, you've just referred to walking around that area and looking at the charring on the trees. The next fire indicator that you mentioned was leaf freeze. Was that something that you were looking at in that area around point A?
In that whole area, we were looking at the leaf freeze again. And would you like me to explain the leaf freeze phenomenon?
Yes, please.
Okay. Leaf freeze isn't restricted to just leaves, even though it's called leaf freeze. It's not restricted to leaves. It's when the fire is burning and it's under control of the wind that's causing the fire. The more flexible type of little plants like leaves, branches, twigs, some grasses, things like bracken fern, will bend in the shape or the direction that the wind's blowing in. They do that because they're flexible and there's plenty of moisture in there. But while they're burnt in that direction, while they're bent in that direction, and the fire's burning in that direction, the fire actually dries the plant out, and it then becomes less flexible. And when the fire's gone, they tend to stay in that same direction because they've dried right out. Now, what that tends to do is, as the plant is bending over, the direction it is bending over generally, always, to me, this is the best indicator of any fire, is this leaf freeze thing. When it bends over, if it's bending this way, the fire is going that way. And to me, it's very apparent when you go to a fire, you see a lot of it, and the more intense the fire, the more apparent it is.
For the record, Your Honour, and for the transcript, Mr. Walkley just indicated with his arms that when the wind was blowing a leaf or a branch toward his left, then leaf freeze would indicate that the fire was travelling from his right towards his left.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Now, you said, Mr. Walkley, that you didn't just look at the charred trees and the leaf freeze at exactly point A. Could you indicate roughly the area that you walked around that was generally in the location of point A while you were looking at leaf freeze and tree charring?
We walked around pretty much most of that area of that whole photo, apart from maybe the left-hand side of the photo where the trampoline is. We didn't go there much. I don't recall ever going there at all, really, apart from along the edges of the driveway where it had burnt. The reason why we didn't go there is because it hadn't burnt there and it was obviously not where the fire started. But we did walk around most of that area, apart from point A to the house and around the right-hand side of that photograph. We walked around all those areas, in amongst the trees and probably even a bit further out than that. And that was over a period of couple of hours, I suppose.
Okay, well, let's do it this way then, please, Mr. Walkley. From point A, do you recall roughly on the photograph where you walked to next?
Well, we walked down the driveway to get to point A, and from memory, we walked up through this. I can't be 100% sure of this. I really don't recall exactly where we walked. I think it was through the middle of the bush.
And which bit of bush are you referring to? Relative to point A, 12 o'clock,
Yeah.
3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock?
Probably 3 o'clock, from point A to 3 o'clock.
Okay, and how far out? How far to the right?
About halfway between A and the side of the photograph.
Okay, could we go
About there.
Mark that B, please. And where next, Mr. Walkley?
Up through the bush towards the house from memory. I can't be 100% sure, but I think that was the direction that we went in.
So about where the cursor is,
Keep coming.
towards the house?
Yeah, about there.
All right, thank you. And mark that C, please, Mr. Temponi. And after that, Mr. Walkley, where next?
I'm sorry, but I really don't remember.
Okay, that's all right. Now, we've covered off charred trees and leaf trees. And as you walked through the area A, B and C, could you tell His Honour what conclusions, if any, you reached from the leaf freeze information?
Yes, that it was apparent that the fire had been burning in a direction from about where C is and burning from the west towards the east.
Thank you. Now, the next indicator that you mentioned was charring or smoke sooting on rocks. Now, as you were in areas A and B, for starters, were you looking at soot on rocks?
We were looking at it. I personally don't think soot on rocks is a really good indicator of fire travel. So it is helpful, but it's not as helpful as the other two. So we were seeing it, and the reason why I don't believe it's a really good indicator is because of the colour of rocks anyway. Rocks can be black, and it's hard for black staining to happen on a black rock. And so that's why I find it an okay indicator, but not a totally reliable indicator. But we were looking at them, yes. As we got...
Can I just pause you there,
Yes.
Mr. Walkley? Can you explain to His Honour what it is about a rock that can inform you about the direction of fire travel?
Yep, I was about to say that. A rock will be blacker on the side where the fires come from the soot staining, and that's why I said that the black rock is a hard one to tell. But there's a second thing which is more reliable, and that is that on the lee side of where the fire's coming from, you'll often find small pieces of unburnt grass or partially burnt grass and twigs, things like that, whereas on the side that the fire originated from, most of those small fragments of combustible leaves or whatever will have burnt away.
All right. And to the extent that you looked at either of those indicators in respect of rocks, while you're at any of points A, B or C, could you tell His Honour what impressions you formed as to the direction from which the fire had come?
Yeah. Once again, the rocks, I took more notice of the unburnt material on the far side, and again this indicated that the fire was travelling from the direction of approximately where C is in the direction of A and B, which is a west to easterly direction again.
Thank you. Now the fourth fire indicator you mentioned was cupping, as in tea cupping. Now firstly, could you tell His Honour what is the phenomenon that you're describing there?
Grass stems, particularly not really fine grass stems, but things like sags, if you're aware what sags are, grow up like a point. As the fire is coming onto them, the fire on the side where the fire is coming from will tend to burn the grass on the side of the fire in an upward manner, leaving a C shape or a cup shape on that side. It's very small and sometimes it's very hard to see, But what does make it easier to find and identify is by rubbing your bare hand across the grass, and then it feels like rubbing across the grain of wood rather than with the grain of wood. And what it does is the C shape, which gives that roughness and that feeling of running against the grain, is always pointed towards the direction that the fire comes from. Now that is something that is not found very often in a intense fire, because all the grass gets burnt. But when you get some grass left, particularly where the fire hasn't been so intense, which is more likely to be where the fire started or near where the fire started, then you can find some of that left behind.
All right. Now, just focusing on areas A and B, initially, Mr. Walkley, was the cupping on grass a relevant indicator that you could observe at those two locations?
No, not at A and B.
All right. What about location C?
I'm sorry, but I don't totally recall I looked for it there. I know we looked for it later on in the day. At that time, we didn't look for it, and I didn't get down on my hands and knees and rub my hand across the grass at that stage. I did later in the day, but not then.
Thank you. Now, on the right-hand side of the photograph that's displayed on the screen, Mr. Walkley, His Honour's had a chance to visit the property, and just inside the frame of the photograph, but along that right-hand side, there's a bank or a gully dropping down into a gully. Could you tell His Honour whether you or Mr. Johnson or Mr. Bones went to the edge of the gully or into the gully?
I went to the edge of the gully. I didn't go down into the gully.
Right.
I don't recall whether Mr. Bones or Johnson did.
Right. And could you indicate on the photograph, to the best of your recollection, whereabouts was the edge of the gully that you went to?
If you can bring that cursor to the right a bit, down, keep coming, and to the right a bit. It was around that area there.
Could we mark that by location D, please? And having moved from A to B to C, can you recall, Mr. Walkley, when it was that you then went to location D?
No, I don't recall what time it was or how long after. I know that during the course of that morning I did go there.
All right, thank you. And again, would His Honour be right in understanding that while you were at location D, you were looking at the fire indicators?
Yeah, looking for all the time we're there, looking at the fire indicators. No matter where we were looking at the indicators. And when we got to location D, it was clear that in the gully the fire had been a much more intense fire than had been at either A, B, C.
And what was it about what you could see in the gully that caused you to think that the fire down there had been more intense?
It was just the trees were black from the base to the top. There'd been either crowning, which I'll explain crowning in a minute. There'd either been crowning of the fire into the treetops or very close to, and that hadn't occurred where we were at A, B and C. Now crowning is where the fire extends from the ground up the tree and into the crown of the tree, and the leaves burn. Sometimes it'll burn through, a crowning fire will burn from tree to tree just in the leaves and not underneath it. And that's a major indicator that this is an intense fire if you get crowning happening.
Now, in the area between the house and location D, could you tell His Honour what, if anything, you observed in terms of indicators as to the direction of fire travel? From
memory, there wasn't much there at all of interest to indicate to us that the fire had started in that area. The fire appeared to have been possibly come out of the gully and just trickled around the grass, or the bits of grass that wasn't very grassy there, but the bits of grass that was, it just seems to have trickled around in different areas.
All right, thank you. Now, having walked around the property in the way that you've then described, could Could you tell His Honour what was the next stage of your investigation?
Yeah, well, during that course of walking around, Tony Johnson, myself and Barry Bones, we were talking about these indicators and discussing between each other where we thought the fire originated from, or the general area in which it originated from. We found that when we got to area C on the photo, and that general area around there, that the indicators became less prevalent, and that they were starting to give us not much indication of all where the fire travelled. And that brought us to a conclusion that we were then in an area of confusion. That's a terminology that's used to say that we are no longer where there are indicators to give us solid information as to where the fire's travelled from, and it seems to be that the fire was confused into which direction it wanted to go, and that's why it's called the area of confusion. Not that we're confused, but the fire seemed to be confused in which direction it wanted to go. And once we identified that, which was in that general area of where the sea is, it was getting close to our lunchtime, as from memory, and I talked to Barry and Tony Johnson and said I'd like to go and talk to the lady for a while, the lady who lived there, and ask her some questions which might give us some more information as to where it started.
Thank you. So the process of investigation up to the point we've now reached, Mr. Walkley, can you estimate how long you'd spent walking around and looking at the other fire indicators?
Yes, well, as I said, I believe we got there in the morning at about 10 o'clock, I think. And at this time, I remember distinctly that it was around lunchtime, because we had Subway rolls, and I said to Barry, I said, give me one of your Subway rolls. I said, I'm going to take it up and offer it to the lady for her lunch. We had some to spare, so that's what I did. And that's why I remember that it was around lunchtime when I went to speak to the lady. So in a time span, if it was 10 till maybe 12, 12:30, it was about 2 hours we spent walking around.
All right, thank you. And I take it that you then went and did actually speak with the lady, who we know as Ms. Barrett?
I did.
And could you tell His Honour, as best you can recall, what was the course of your conversation with Ms. Barrett?
When I went and spoke to Ms. Barrett, she was clearly a bit distressed about what had happened. I tried to ease her tenseness, if you want, by offering her the Subway roll for lunch. I said what we were doing. I said, I asked her to explain to me what she saw, which may help us finding out where the fire started. I also said to her, and I sort of regret having said to her, that you won't be into trouble for this, so please tell me the truth, because you won't be in any trouble, you won't get into trouble, whatever has happened is an accident. The reason I regret it is because of what's happened since. I think in my own mind that I've sort of led her a bit astray, but that was irrelevant to the fire cause. She then explained to me what she had seen on the day that the fire started. And to the best of my knowledge, she was the lady or the person who first observed the fire in its initial stages.
And can you tell His Honour, to the best of your recollection, what Ms. Barrett said to you by way of indicating where she had first seen the fire?
Yes, we were standing on her wooden deck out the front of the house that you can see in the photo, and we were right up against the eastern rail of that deck. She pointed out to me that where she saw the flames first, which was approximately 20 metres from the house. And she also explained to me that it was to the left, which was to the north, of an old stump or that had burnt there.
Could I ask Mr. Temponi, please, to enlarge that photograph that's currently on the screen a little to the area of the house. And so Can you indicate, you see that there's the house with the wooden porch, Mr. Walkley, and then to the up on the photo, which is to the east, you see that there's pink tape and a green arrow marking on the ground. Could you indicate for His Honour which area you understood Ms. Barrett to have been indicating as the location where she first saw the fire?
Well, I object to that, Your Honour. What the witness understood, or is not relevant in my submission, is what she indicated. Not what he
It's the
understood.
same thing in the sense, isn't it? Indicated, conveyed, understood. It would have to be done by somebody pointing and somebody saying over there a bit, or that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was all I intended to convey by the question, Your Honour. So, if I might put it this way, Mr. Walkley, where did Ms. Barrett indicate to you she'd first seen the fire?
It is where that pink line goes across where the green arrow is. The green arrow is running off the pink line.
Right.
Not that pink line, that one there.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Temponi, could you mark that with the letter E, please?
Not where, yeah, that, no, down, there.
Right, thank you.
So at the base of that green arrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
But she also explained that it was in a bit of a line, as in it wasn't just one spot of fire, there was a bit of a line of fire.
So that's a bit of a line of fire running north-south.
It wasn't running north or south, it was just a line of fire. It wasn't going in either direction.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well,
So I think what it sort of means, Mr. Walkley, is that the fire was perhaps moving east-west, but as a line, and the line was aligned north-south.
yeah,
That's right, that's
across-
correct.
In the same way as the house, the end of the house runs north-south.
Yes, that's right.
All right. And what do you next recall was said between you and Ms. Barrett, Mr. Walkley?
She told me that prior to this fire, they'd had a fire in that stump. That her and her partner or boyfriend, I'm not sure which it was, had a fire in the stump and was several days before this day, or several days before this fire started. I asked her, was the fire out in the stump? She said as far as she knew it was, they'd taken precautions to make sure the fire was out by kicking dirt on it, I think she said. I think as she said, a partner might have kicked dirt on it, and they were comfortable that that fire was out. And from then, I asked the lady to make it easier for myself and the other investigators to pinpoint where she was saying where she first saw the fire, if she would walk with me over to where she was pointing to and spray some lines on the ground for us where she specifically saw the fire burning, which she did, and she was happy to do that.
And could we enlarge that photo, that screenshot again, please, Mr. Temponi? And I take it, Mr. Walkley, that the line that we marked as E a moment ago was one of the spray-painted pink lines?
Yes.
Right, and after Ms. Barrett sprayed that pink line, what happened next?
I don't recall exactly what happened and how long this took, but after a little while, Miss Barrett said, hang on, it might have been a bit over further than that. And I said, well, spray another line where you think it is this time, which she did.
And can you indicate on the photograph where that second pink line is, Mr. Walker?
It sort of merges in with the pink tape that goes around on the top side of that photo.
Right, so just up from the green arrow, is that
Yeah.
right?
And that's where it is there.
Thank you. I don't think we need to mark that. It's clear. And just while we're looking at this, Mr. Walkley, can you tell His Honour whether the green arrow was marked at the same time or at about that time, and if so, by who and why?
It was marked at about that same time, and that arrow is to indicate, so it's easier to see the direction that the fire was travelling in as per the physical evidence that we've been looking at before.
All right. So after Ms. Barrett had identified the pink lines, could you tell His Honour what physical evidence you and Mr. Bones or Mr. Johnson then looked for in that area?
Well, this is at the stage where we started looking at the little rocks to see what was burnt on the other side and what wasn't burnt on the other side. And that's where it was once again corroborating what we thought that the fire had burnt from along that line of the direction of the green arrow. We spoke and, that's the last conversation I had at that time with Miss Barrett, and she went back to her house. We then continued on what we were doing after we'd had our lunch.
All right, and so in terms of I'll just bring back that photograph, which I think was, lost it, I'm sorry, 63. So after you'd had your lunch, Mr. Walkley, you mentioned that this was the point where you were looking at the small indicators like the rocks. Can you tell His Honour in detail what was the process of investigation that you then followed, and who you were doing it with, and what conclusions you reached about the direction of fire travel or the point of origin?
Well, we determined an area of origin within the area of confusion that we've already talked about. And that area of origin is the area in this photo that's taped off by the pink tape.
Thank you. And who's the we in that sentence, Mr. Walker?
Well, I was clearly of the opinion that that was the area of origin. I was the more senior investigator there and probably made that decision. However, that wasn't on my own volition. That was with some corroboration with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Bones that we all agreed that we were in the right area.
All right.
We then discussed the information that the lady had given us about the campfire, and with nothing else we'd seen at that time to indicate anything else that could have caused the fire, we were of the opinion that the relationship between the log stump burning that she told us about, which had been a few days beforehand, more than likely had some correlation between that log and the fire, because there's nothing else we knew of at that stage that would change, that would cause it. So we then we were all of that opinion, and then started looking very closely at anything on the ground within that area of origin, and looking for anything that could have caused it, and in particular looking to see if there was any indication where a root of a tree could have burnt through to the surface in that area.
And Mr. Walkley, can you tell His Honour why you were particularly looking for roots?
Well, it's a well-known fact that when stumps burn, particularly big stumps, that the root system can burn as well, and burn underground and can burn for quite a while. The lady who I'd spoke to was specific in saying that the fire that she saw wasn't in or at the stump. It was further to the left than the stump. I found no reason to not believe what she was saying. She was being very credible. She wasn't worried about any repercussions. And so I thought, well, it's close to the stump, but it's not in the stump. So that, to me, sort of ruled out the stump as having caused the fire, and more likely been associated with the root system of the stump.
Right. And what was the process that you then followed to examine the ground within the area of confusion?
Yeah, looking very close at anything that was on the ground. It was very rocky. Any grass, or the majority of grass, was either very fine and hadn't been burnt, or had been burnt, and was nothing left of it pretty much other than just black ground. So looking at the black ground very closely just to see if anything stood out as being not consistent with everything else we were seeing. And I believe it was me, I'm pretty sure it was me, I saw what was on the ground, a circle of charcoal on the surface of the dirt, which didn't match with the grass that was burnt that was around that circle of charcoal. And I brought that to the attention I'm not sure whether it was Mr. Bones or Mr. Johnson. I brought that to the attention of one of them, and it may have even been both of them. I said, I believe what we may have here is a root or part of a root that's been burnt. And I said, which may be what we are looking for, if that is the cause of the fire. And after then, we very slowly started excavating around that bit of charcoal to confirm either yes it was or it wasn't a root.
All right. Now, firstly, can you tell His Honour, please, what kind of tools you used to excavate around that first piece of charcoal?
Yes, I bought from my house my own little bag of fire investigation things, which I'd had for quite a while, and that included the spray aerosols, the arrows that you'll see in photos, and some tools. In that bag was a little army type fold-up shovel, the one you use in your hands, just like a little garden trowel, and a normal garden trowel. They are the tools that we used to excavate around that bit of charcoal.
And could you describe, His Honour, then please, in as much detail as you can recall, the process by which you excavated around and from that piece of charcoal?
Okay. What our intention was to try and find where that root went underground and trail it back to its source. And the way we did that was very, very carefully scraping the dirt from above it until we found the charcoal underneath the dirt, and then dig deeper to remove the dirt from either side of that bit of a root, so that we had basically a three-dimensional root, or remains of a root in charcoal shape, and trace it back to where it came from. We kept on doing that for a period of, I don't know how long, but I think it was hours, very carefully scraping the top off. Now, that became more difficult the further we went, because the root went deeper into the ground. So it started at the surface, but by the time we'd finished, it was about 50 centimetres under the ground that we were excavating with these little trowels. We did use a shovel, but the shovel was used to move out of the way the dirt we'd already scraped off. And so we excavated an area of about, from memory, 2 to 3 metres from where we first observed the root at the surface to where we were having so much difficulty keeping the dirt from destroying the stuff underneath, because every time we moved it from the top of it, it'd cave in, and the charcoal was so fragile it just nearly turned to dust, and we were losing it all the time. And then we'd pick it up, and then we'd find it again, and we might lose it for that far, an inch, and then we'd pick it up again, because of the dirt kept on falling on it and destroying it. However, after going that 2 or 3 metres, then at about a depth of about 50 centimetres, we stopped the excavation.
All right. Now, could we go please to... Oh, I'm sorry, I've just been reminded, John, before we go into any more of the photographs, I would seek to tender the screenshot that Mr. Temponi took that was marked up with the letters to indicate the locations that Mr. Walkley has described.
Thank you.
Now, could we go please, again within document 101, to photograph 0050. Now, Mr. Walkley, can you describe for His Honour what is shown in this photograph?
The stump is, the whole stump is from where that yellow marker is, which is the 7, over to where that bit of stump sticking up to the left, like a bit of a horn.
Yep.
That's the stump that we've been talking about. And that's the stump that the lady spoke to me about that they'd been burning in.
All right.
Yep.
Sorry, go on, please.
At where the yellow marker 20 is, you'll see a white shovel, and on top of that white shovel is a white wooden arrow. That's the arrow I bought from home in my little bag. And that is showing where we were excavating when we finished, where the route was heading to in that hole.
All right. Now, do you recall, Mr. Walkley, as you excavated along the path of the route, was the route always travelling in a single direction?
It was going in a general direction from where we started towards the stump, but it wasn't a straight line. It was a bit of a snaky, meandering line, but it wasn't straight like a rule line, but it wasn't zigzag either. It was just a meander.
Now, Mr. Walkley, you didn't excavate all the way back to the stump, did you?
No, we didn't.
And why did you not do that?
As I've just said just a while ago, everything as we were digging down was falling on top of what we were finding, and it was destroying what we were finding, and it was, in a sense, becoming just too difficult without destroying the scene, what we were looking for. It was sort of a no-win situation. We were finding what we were finding, but as we were finding it was getting destroyed again. And we didn't see...
And it was going deeper.
It was going deeper and deeper, and it was getting more and more difficult. And if you can see, there's in that photograph, right next to photo 20, some of those rocks that we've dug out, those rocks were falling on the charcoal, and they were destroying it. The charcoal was extremely delicate, and to maintain it as what it was very, very difficult.
All right, thank you. Now, what conclusions did you reach, Mr. Walkley, about the role of that, firstly, the role of that route in terms of starting a fire on the surface?
Well, that route was clearly charcoal at the surface where we first found it, and was clearly charcoal from that point back to where we stopped excavating. So it had been burning underground, clearly. Otherwise, it couldn't have been charcoal. We hadn't found any other indications of any other possible cause, and concluded that the fire had been started by the root of that stump that had been burning underground for several days since the campfire first was last seen burning by the people who lived there.
And Mr. Walkley, can you explain to His Honour why you concluded that the burning root led to the fire rather than a fire on the surface causing burning of the root?
It's basically not. It's highly improbable that the grass burning on the surface could have ignited that root. Purely because of the fact grass is grass, it's a very small fuel load, very fine fuel, and gives off very minimal heat. What heat there is, heat rises, or the majority of heat rises. Heat moves in three different ways: convection, conduction, and radiation. Now, in this case of grass burning, at least 90% of the heat rises into the atmosphere. It doesn't go down into the ground. So what I'm saying is the flame from the grass would not have enough heat to burn down into the root to catch the root on fire. And even if it could, there was so little grass there, it was very fine, it wouldn't have enough heat available to it when it was burning to be able to ignite a root on fire.
All right. And next, Mr. Walkley, you've referred to this root as being associated with the stump. Given that you hadn't excavated all the way back to the stump, what caused you to think that this root had come from the stump?
When we started excavating, the root was about as round as a 10-cent piece. By the time we got to where we finished excavating, the width of the root was, from memory, probably twice the width of that. So the root was gradually increasing in diameter as we went back towards the stump. And it was going in the direction of that stump. There was no other stump in that nearby vicinity that we could identify that the root could have come from.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Walkley, you've given detailed evidence about your examination of the route that you have just described. Can I ask you to explain to His Honour whether you also considered any other potential causes for the Fawcett Dunalley bushfire separate from the phenomenon associated with the route that you've described?
Yes, I've always considered other possibilities. While we were looking around, we were talking about these sort of things. Myself and Mr. Bones and Mr. Johnson, we discussed what was the possibility of lightning. That had already been investigated by Mr. Bones, and there had been no lightning strikes. I asked, was there any information that would indicate that somebody could have lit this fire deliberately, or even children lighting it? And I had no information given to me or supplied that would indicate that that was a probability or possibility. There were power lines in the general area, and Mr. Bones had an electrical inspector check them, so I was told that that is pretty much out of the question. And then just nothing else that we might have observed while we're looking. We always, you don't know what to discount unless you find it, and we didn't find anything to discount, so didn't find anything else that could have caused it.
Now, Mr. Walkley, His Honour's heard some evidence that there was a lot of broken glass or discarded bottles scattered around Ms. Barrett's property in the general area of the residence. Could you tell His Honour whether anything you saw suggested a plausible possibility that the fire might have been ignited by the sun being magnified through a piece of bent or broken glass?
I can. I've taken the period of time since while I was in fire investigation, and even since I've studied the phenomena of glass causing fires quite extensively. I have been to two fires where fires been caused by glass being magnified, and both of them were inside houses. One was lead glass crystals, where the light shining through a window has gone into the crystal, refracted back and been magnified onto the carpet and burnt the carpet of the house. Another instance was where a very highly polished piece of glass, ornamental, I don't know what to call it, it's one of those round like paperweights with little things inside it, that had magnified onto a bed and made some bedding char. That's the only two instances I know that I've attended to. There was another one that I'm aware of in Launceston where glass went into a house through a goldfish bowl, was magnified through the water of the goldfish bowl and caught some fabric on fire. They are the only three instances I know of personally. The instance of a fire catching a light outside from glass that you would normally find outside is and has been proven as pretty much a fallacy. I know that for the last 200 years, people have broadcast and supported the possibility that glass outside will catch things on fire, but there have been numerous studies, scientific studies, right around the world and including Australia, where scientists and others have disproven the possibility for many reasons, and I'll give some of those. Glass that I referred to that causes fires is high quality, highly polished, and able to magnify and refract light easily. Glass you find outside is not the same glass, and perchance my position where I worked before the fire brigade was working in the Australian glass manufacturers, where I operated the machineries that made the glass, and I'm aware of what goes into making glass bottles. What makes glass bottles is totally different glass than what makes lead glass, and it doesn't have the ability to allow light through it as easy as lead glass, sorry. Coloured glass, which is often found on the roadsides and things like that, like beer bottles, that was originally invented to make things pretty and also to preserve the foodstuffs inside the glass. And so the glass was actually designed and used to reduce the amount of sunlight, not increase the sunlight. at another fire that I investigated where somebody suggested as glass as being a possibility on the side of a road catching fires was in the area between Baghdad and Kempton. And myself and Gerald Crawford, the other very experienced fire investigator I referred to when I first came in here, we walked kilometres up and down that highway looking for bits of glass that could have caused a fire. And there was a lot of glass, but none of it was in the condition that you would say could have possibly caused grass to catch on fire. And the reason being this is that it is not clear enough. The glass that is outside is dirty. It's been sitting there for quite a while and gets covered with dust. It is not shaped in the right shape to be able to magnify. In other words, it hasn't got the convex surfaces that have on both sides like magnifying glasses or like reading glasses. And window glass, which was apparently here, is different glass again to what beer bottle glass is or lead glass is. It's just window glass is flat. It doesn't have a convex surface. It could not concentrate rays of sunlight to magnify them to catch grass on fire. And even if it could, you would have to have it in the perfectly positioned spot at a distance away from the grass that would allow it to focus over that distance. It's like holding a magnifying glass against what you're reading. It doesn't magnify it until you pull it away from it. And they are the reasons that glass, and as I said, there are numerous documents and easily looked at to find that glass will not cause fires. It's a fallacy, and it's taken 200 years for people to think it is true. And it'll probably take another 200 years for people not to believe it's true. And I think any investigator today who would come up with the possibility of glass causing bushfires is pretty much grasping at straws.
Thank you.
Is it a convenient time?
Thank you, Your Honour. Yes.
All right, we'll take the luncheon adjournment. Thank you.
Stand, please.